Hello YouTubers! I will be going through this week's games, review last week's tips and leaderboard of our footy tip comp, and also go through my Brownlow Votes for season 2025. My Brownlow medal predictor after round 16. We got two players tied in first spot with 26 votes. B. Smith, Geelong, and N. Dacos, Collingwood. In third spot with 22 votes, we have C. Sarong, Fremantle. And in fourth spot, we've got N. Anderson, Gold Coast with 20 votes. And to round out the top 5, in fifth spot with 18 votes is J. Dawson, Adelaide. These are my top 5 of the 2025 Brownlow Votes after round 16. My tips for round 16 that I got. What can I say? Magnificent round. I got all 7 games correct. Woohoo! The Power, the Doggies, the Suns, Hawks, Maggies, Crows, and Freo won their respective games. That's 7 out of 7. You beauty! Let's see the leaderboard of the Talking Effing AFL free tips after round 16. In top spot, or I should say 3 players in joint top spot with 88 tips are me, Talking Effing AFL, Patrick L32, and Potter 1. And in full spot with 86 votes is I Am Hacks. Alright, it's pretty close in the top 4. Come on, let's see who I tip for round 17. Before we continue, I would like to ask for a very small favour. If you enjoy this AFL content, please take a sec to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That would be awesome. Okay, let's return back to the show. The first game of the week is between North Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs, played on a Thursday night at Marvel Stadium. Last week, the Kangaroos were very disappointing and lost to the Hawks by 85 points, whereas the Doggies had a good 9-point win against the Sydney Swans at the SCG. The players injured for the Roos are Bergman, Hall, Ford, Goda, and Darcy Tucker. For the Doggies, they'll be missing Gallagher, Jones, Selwood, Chalor, and Waitman. The players in the mix for the Kangaroos are Callum Jones, Phillips, and Harvey. For the Doggies, their players in the mix are Bozinga, Dolan, and Poulter. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield set of the 2 respective sides. For the Doggies, in ruck you got English with the midfields of the Bont, Lever, Richards, Fraser, who kicked 4 goals against the Swans last week, and Sanders. For the Roos, you got Xavier in ruck with the midfields of Wardlaw, Powell, LDU, Simpkin, and Stevens. Just looking at the Western Bulldogs ruck midfield setup, they've got class players. It's even between the 2 ruckmans of English and Xavier, but the midfielders, the Bont, Lever, Richards, just class players. And I expect the Doggies to win more of the ball in the midfield, and therefore quite enough inside 50 for young gun forward Sam Darcy to kick a bag, and I'll tip the Western Bulldogs to beat North Melbourne Kangaroos by 26 points. The second game, played on a Friday night, is between Carlton and Collingwood. Last week, the Blues were terrible, only kicked 1 goal in the first half against Port Adelaide and had lost to the Power by 50 points, whereas Collingwood had a good come from behind win to beat the West Coast Eagles by 29 points. The players injured for the Blues are Cottrell, Kemp, McKay, Newman, O'Keefe, Jagger Smith, and Walsh. For the Maggies, they'll be missing DeGoey, Frampton, Harrison, Jow, McRae, McCready, McInnes, and Schultz. A lot of players injured for the Maggies. The players in the mix for the Blues are O'Farrell, Pitnott, and Durden. For the Maggies, their players in the mix are Parker, Hill, and Haynes. Where the game will be won at is the ruck midfield set of the 2 respective sides. For the Blues, you got TDK or DeConning in ruck with the midfields of Hewitt, Ollie Hollins, Cripps, Akers, and Lord. For the Maggies, you got Cameron in ruck with the midfields of Long and Dacos, Pendlebury, Allen, and Cripps. That's J. Cripps. Just looking at the ruck midfield setup, Collingwood, they've got more gun players in the middle. Dacos, Pendlebury, even the Cripps who's played 250 odd consecutive games. They've just got more class on the ball, and I expect Collingwood to win playing the ball in the middle and feed a lot of inside 50 to their forwards where they can kick a bag of goals, where I expect Elliott, Membre and Malchek to kick a lot of goals. I'm going to tip Collingwood to easily beat Carlton by 39 points. The third game of the week is between West Coast Eagles and GWS Giants. This is also played on a Friday night at Optus Stadium. Last week, the Eagles were very competitive but lost to Collingwood in the last quarter to eventually lose the game by 29 points, whereas the Giants had to bye. The players injured for the Eagles are Allen, Sheed, Waterman and Yo. For the Giants, they'll be missing Angro, Hannaford, Stein, Taylor as a big loss, Ward, Woodius and Whitfield. The players in the mix for the Eagles are Petrocelli, Bazzo and Archer Reid. For the Giants, their players in the mix are Ware, Delana and James Link. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield setup of the two respective sides. For the Eagles, you got Flynn in ruck with midfielders of McCarthy, Reid, Hall, Hugh and Hutchinson. For the Giants, you got Briggs in ruck with midfielders of McMullen, Tom Green, Betford, Josh Kelly and Ware. Just looking at the Giants ruck midfield setup, they've got more class players, Tom Green, Josh Kelly, and I expect the Giants forwards to get a lot of the ball from the midfield where Hogan can kick a bag, Toby Green and Jake Stringer. Therefore, I'm going to tip the Giants to win by 18 points. The fourth game of the week is between Essendon Bombers and Gold Coast Suns, played on a Saturday at lunchtime at Marvel Stadium. Last week, the Dons had to bye, whereas the Suns had a good 19-point win over the Melbourne Demons. The players injured for the Bombers are Brian, Draper, Edwards, Elhari, Haynes, Langford, Nawing, Redmond and Zach Reid. So many players injured, whereas the Suns, they'll be missing Ballard, Berry, the two Grahams, Hilberg, Noble and Jake Rogers. The players in the mix for the Dons are Durham back from suspension, Shield, Irwin and Dave Wicks. For the Suns, their players in the mix are Davies, Holman and Moyle. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield setup of the two respective sides. For the Bombers, you got second gamer Vicentini in ruck with the midfielders of Caldwell, Parrish, Merritt, Goulfey and Setterfield. For the Suns, you got Witts in ruck with the midfielders of Miller, Anderson, Rao, Closey and Fiorini. Just looking at the Suns ruck midfield setup, I expect Witts to dominate against second gamer Vicentini to feed the ball a lot to Miller, Anderson and Rao, and therefore the Suns will get a lot of inside 50 where King can kick a bag, that's Ben King and Ben Long. Therefore I'm going to tip the Suns to beat the Bombers by 22 points. The next game, played on a Saturday afternoon, is between Geelong Cats and Richmond at GMHBA Stadium. Last week the Cats had to bye, whereas the Tigers lost to the Adelaide Crows by 68 points. The players injured for the Cats are Conway, De Koning, Guthrie and Moyler. For the Tigers, they'll be missing Clark, Dow, Gray, McAuliffe, Smiley, and now you can add Lynch to suspension. The players in the mix for the Cats are Bowles, Closey, Buse and Clark. For the Tigers, their players in the mix are Larlaw, Short, Tressy and Sims. Where the game will be won at, it's where the position of the two respective sides. Richmond are in full rebuilding mode, got so many kids playing in their roster and now losing Lynch to suspension. That just reduces the experience that the Tigers have on field, whereas Geelong, very experienced side, top 3, contending, expected to make top 4 this year. I expect Geelong to easily beat Richmond by 65 points. The next game, played on a Saturday night, is between Brisbane Lions and Port Adelaide Power at the Gabba on a Saturday night. The Lions had to bye, whereas the Power had a magnificent 50-point win against Carlton, where they kept the Blues to only 1 goal by half time. The players injured for the Lions are Coleman, Dode, McCarthy, Payne and Smith. For the Power, they're missing Crockram, Marshall, Moss, Walsh and Ollie Wines. The players in the mix for the Lions are McInerney, Gardner and Gallup. For the Power, their players in the mix are Finlayson, Burton, Mead and Moraz. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield setup of the two respective sides. For the Lions, you've got 4 in ruck with the midfielders of Dunkley, Neal, McCluggage, Berry and Bailey. For the Power, you got Vicentini in ruck, who's played less than 10 games, with the midfielders of Bergman, Butters, Giroux, Horn Francis and Burgoyne. Looking at the two ruckmans, I expect 4 to dominate against Vicentini, but the Lions have got great midfield depth. Dunkley, Neal, Berry, McCluggage, Bailey. The Power got good midfielders, Horn Francis, Bergman and Butters. Lions have greater depth, where the next lot of midfielders are Drew and Burgoyne, whereas the Lions got the 2 Ashcroft brothers. Just so many midfielders that they can rotate into their team. And they'll win the inside 50s and provide enough scoring opportunities to Logan Morris, Hipwood, Cameron to kick a bag. And I'm going to pick the Lions by 17 points. The next game, played on a Saturday night, is between St Kilda Saints and the Hawthorn Hawks. The Saints lost to Freo by 12 points, whereas the Hawks had a good 85-point win against North Melbourne Kangaroos. The players injured for the Saints are Cordy, Howard, King and Philippou. The Hawks will be missing Day, Ryan and Shumshaw. The players in the mix for the Saints are Burns, Shoalmaker and Boyd. For the Hawks, their players in the mix are Frost, McGuinness and Bruce. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield setup of the two respective sides. For St Kilda, in ruck you got Marshall, who may be an injury doubt. Then you got the midfielders of McRae, Steele, Garcia, Ringhager and Wood. For the Hawks, you got Meek in ruck, with the midfielders of Newcombe, Ward, Nash, Moore and D'Ambrosi. Just looking at that, I expect Meek to beat Marshall in ruck. And in the midfields, you've got McRae and Steele, who are the hard inside mids, but Hawthorn also has Newcombe, Ward and Nash, Moore plus D'Ambrosi, all hard working midfielders, where D'Ambrosi can feed a lot of ball to the full line of the wing. And if they do that, they've got the Wizard Watson and Gunston to kick a lot of goals. Gunston had a magnificent game last week against the Kangaroos, where he booted 7 goals. Saints were very competitive against Freo, but Hawthorn are at their top of their game. And I'm going to tip Hawthorn to beat St Kilda in a close one by 11 points. The next game, played on a Sunday lunchtime, is between Sydney Swans and Fremantle Dockers at the SCG. The Swans lost to the Western Bulldogs at home by 9 points, whereas the Dockers had a good 12-point win against St Kilda Saints. The players injured for the Swans are Adams, Edwards, McDonald and Patton. For the Dockers, they'll be missing Sturt, Simpson, Riddle, Uden Jones and maybe Pearce, still with a shin injury. The players in the mix for the Swans are McCartan, Bryce and Adams. For Freo, their players in the mix are Ash, Draper and Sharp. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield setup of the two respective sides. For Sydney, you got Grundy in ruck with the midfielders of Heaney, Rowbottom, Warner, Lloyd, Gordon. For Freo, you got Jackson ruck with the midfielders of Sarong, Brayshaw, Wagner, O'Driscoll and Johnson. The ruck battle's going to be magnificent. It's going to be pretty even between Grundy and Jackson that act like a midfield when the ball goes onto the ground. So it's even between those two. And then just a beautiful matchup for the midfielders. Heaney, Warner against Sarong, Brayshaw. I just give the chance to the Sydney midfielders of Warner and Heaney as they can go outside and kick goals. Whereas Sarong and Brayshaw are good midfielders that are very hard working two-way runners. Then you got like class of Rowbottom and Gordon elite kicking against Johnson and O'Driscoll. Based on that, the Swans got great midfield and they're coming back into shape. And if they get a lot of inside 50, which I expect Sydney to do, they'll have enough supply to Maywood, Papley to kick a winning score. And I'm going to say Sydney just in a 3-point win. The last game, played on a Sunday twilight, is between the Adelaide Crows and the Melbourne Demons at Adelaide Oval. Last week, the Crows had a good 68-point win against Richmond, whereas the D's lost away to Gold Coast Suns by 18 points. The players injured for the Crows are Crouch, Murray, Oscar Ryan, Welsh, and Pedlar. For the D's, they'll be missing Johnson, McAdam, Moitz Wakefield, Seston, and Spargo. The players in the mix for the Crows are Jones, Taylor, and Burgess. For the D's, their players in the mix are Van Rooyen, Lever, and Roy Morgan. Where the game will be won at, it's the Crows' full line against Melbourne defense. In the full line for the Crows, you got Keys, Philfoot, Saligo, Rochelle, Walker, and Fogarty. In defense for the D's, you got McVeigh, Turner, Lindsay, Howes, May, and Bowie. Just looking at the Crows' full line, they look pretty powerful. They've got the three totals of Fogarty, Philfoot, and Walker, and with Rochelle and Keys cramming the ball and kicking goals, or especially Rochelle, whereas Keys is more of a two-way player where he runs up and down the field and get a lot of goals over the slingshot counter-attack. I see the Crows easily kicking 15 plus goals. However, looking at Melbourne's attack, they didn't score much last week against the Suns, and it's been misfiring this season. I don't see the Melbourne forwards kicking over 90 points, and I'm going to pick the Crows to win by 26 points. My tips for round 17 are the first 4 away teams to win away. That include the Doggies, the Maggies, the Giants, and the Suns. Geelong and the Lions to win their respective home games. The Hawks to beat the Saints at Marble, and the Crows and Sydney Swans to win their 2 home games against Freo and Melbourne Demons respectively. Thank you for watching my video, and it would be appreciated if you can subscribe and comment to my videos. Hopefully you enjoyed my video, and see you next time. Cheers or bye.